So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I'm so excited. This is the last webinar of the season. I cannot believe we're ready to hit the midsummer. We just hit, summer beginning on Monday, but we are in the US. We call this almost midsummer when we hit the 4th of July, because that's a very important date for us. So today I'm super excited. So next slide, let's talk about why we've been doing these webinars. The reason we're doing webinars is we at Global IOC really believe in a community of practice. And we have not, when people finish their core, the associate or the advanced, the master, even at the chartered level, we want to help people continue to develop. So we always have webinars. We will have them again in the fall. We might change the day and the time, but stay tuned at Global IOC for more information on that. But this is to help us sharpen the saw. What are some things we haven't thought about? And so I'm going to turn it over to our two faculty this morning, Marilyn and Kimberly, who are amazing leadership coaches and are experts in this area, to help us think a little bit more about how we can encourage leaders to develop their coaching muscle and their coaching skills. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly, or is it Marilyn that's starting?
Kimberly, did you want me to go through this?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So as Peggy already really indicated, this is about, leaders becoming coaches. And so many of you are already coaching leaders in organizations. And we're going to talk about, I think we've always known that leaders should be coaches of their employees, but there is some really new compelling evidence as to the why. And actually, I'm going to be really interested in the conversation with this group, because we definitely know of a phenomenon going on in the West right now, and I'm really interested to hear globally if people are finding the same thing. So we're going to be talking about this new compelling why for leaders to be coaches. A little bit of a refresher on just the benefits to organizations and to leaders. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, and actually this is a really interactive session, so I shouldn't be saying we're going to talk about, meaning Kimberly and I mean we as a group are going to be talking about, different aspects and changes in helping leaders become coaches. So we'll spend some time on that. So be prepared to have your mute buttons off and to be in some breakouts and to have some conversations. How do we a leader's mindset from being a teller, a knower of all things, to being a coach and a better listener and guiding people to their own conclusions. And then at the very end, we have some tools. I have been for 10 years now working with a very large company in the US, 36,000 employees, and I have been teaching a class on turning leaders into coaches and how to coach for managers. And so I have some very basic tools that I am going to be sharing at the end, too basic for this crew, right? But things that you can use with some of the organizations that you're working with. So you can go to the next slide. So I think for those of you who know Kimberly and I, we both have a background working many years for GE, for me specifically for GE Healthcare, Kimberly GE Healthcare and GE Corporate. So we can't let a session go by without having a Jack Welch quote in here. And this is one that is so thought-provoking to me, because I'm going to tell you, when I got my first leadership role, which was at GE, I had no clue that being a leader was about, growing up. I thought a leader was, they wanted to know everything I knew, and that I'd gotten the job because I was a great individual contributor in this organization. And so so I could just tell every team how to do it, because if they just did it like me, life would be wonderful. And what a lesson I learned the hard way. So really making sure we help our leaders, especially those of you coaching newer managers and those that are newer in leadership. Although I run into this with my executives I'm coaching all the time, they lose sight of this pretty easily. And so this is what, today is all about, of how can we help our leaders have the mindset that it isn't about them. It isn't about how much they know. It's really about the team and growing the team.
So this is really when Marilyn mentions that, hey, the game might have changed for us a bit. So it's the same solution, but a very different why, a more compelling why, and certainly one that's created a sense of urgency as we hopefully at some point reach post-pandemic levels. So there are a series of reports and articles that have come out that, again, Marilyn and Peggy both alluded to, that are explaining a different type of work environment. So for those of you who haven't seen it, these are great downloads. Korn Ferry has the Future of Organizations report that just came out. Radically Human is all over the report. There are several articles, as Marilyn mentioned. You can certainly Google it and bring up all of them. Here's an example. There's one that just came out from the Wall Street Journal. New York Times did an expose on it about the Great Resignation and how folks, they're predicting within the next 2 to 3 years, about 40% turnover at companies for a whole bunch of different reasons, which we're going to talk about in just a second. And then the last one by McLean and Company is a 2021 Trends HR report, where you can see developing leaders is still at the top. But again, as you dive into the report, you'll see that the reasons are just a little different in terms of the compelling why. So let's break that down for you a little bit. We're going to spend a bit of time on this slide, again, just to create a different sense of urgency. So same solution, but again, perhaps arming you with some additional data to help support your individual coaching work. So here are just 8 that I pulled from several different reports and articles. First one, remote workers. The prediction at this point is that 48% will continue to work at home more of the time than they are in an office, which requires a totally different set of skills. Not only the whole remote working skill set, but it's really answering the question, if I am now remote, how is success going to be determined for me? So I'm no longer in the face of my manager. I'm no longer with my peer group day to day, entertaining cubicle drive-bys, if you will. So how can I succeed if I am not there? So the onus is going to be on both the manager and on the employee. Second one, employer is a social safety net. This one I thought was really fascinating. You guys have all heard of kind of matching gift programs, adoption assistance, financial well-being programs. Now they're looking at different ways that the employer can actually be a social safety net, helping people with all of the struggles that they have when they do work from home. So it's helping them truly find not necessarily balance, but fit is really what it's going to be all about at this point. This whole concept of contingent workers. So we've, been introduced to the gig economy. Many of us participate in the gig economy, but in this case, the goal is to reduce costs by 32% and to augment staff, which will be around the 12%. Folks are really looking at a different type of workforce. So you'll see things that we just haven't seen in the past. So there'll be formal HR processes and management. Non-traditional employment models are going to be a thing. And really, performance management is going to take on a whole different look. Looking at not only what they do in company, but also starting to look at government policy, where co-employment laws might be blurred lines now that the gig economy is increasing even more. Number 4, critical skills are no longer synonymous with roles. So for those of you who come from an HR background, you might be familiar with this whole critical skills component, where you really want to protect any role that if the proverbial beer truck were to come along, you would have a significant problem at your company. Because in this case, now the critical skills are spread amongst roles, where folks are really going to be struggling for what they need to do here. So in this case, a couple different things. Competencies will look different. Motivated employees to develop these skills is going to be top of mind for folks. They don't just prepare people for the next role, they prepare them in role for very specific things, change management being at the top of that list. The future of work is really about re-engineering the workplace and being able to focus on critical skills versus critical roles. And then the ability to move talent around faster and in more significant ways than ever before is going to become a critical part of this. So that overall theme is all about organizational resiliency and complexity. And a leader being able to help coach their employees and staff through that complexity is going to be critical. It's no longer, here's your job, get it done, see you on Friday. It's your job is going to evolve and change and grow. And oh, by the way, I expect you to be a part of that solution in that new definition. Fifth one, humanizing work. We've been hearing about this for a long time, you guys. This is really what's leading to the Great Resignation. This is from the Microsoft Work Trend Index report. There's a link to it in this deck. And of course, Marilyn and I are happy to send you guys this detail post-session here. But the estimation is 26 to 40% of employees will be actively searching for and predicted to leave their jobs within the next 2 years or so. The range is really by global population. So it's about 36% in the US, closer to 40% in Europe. Asia, APAC regions are falling somewhere in between. And the rationale for that is that their eyes were wide open during this pandemic and how their company treated the work and treated them and treated their challenges. And they have decided that they want to buy into a different type of culture. So they're on the hunt for that culture. And a big driver of that is going to be, can I find a place that really helps me understand, that really understands that I need to be treated more humanely, if you will. So this humanizing work component really does become a critical driver. So there are a couple different things that will drive that specifically. One is that leaders need to develop emotional intelligence and the soft skills to have that compassion and that empathy that will demonstrate true care and concern to their employees. Diversity and inclusion is, as you guys all know, top of the list. And here it's not necessarily just defined by gender or race or ethnicity or part of the globe or sexual orientation and so forth. It's really about inclusion. So can I make all members around the phone, around Zoom, around the table feel like they belong, their voice is heard, and they're adding value? When people find they're not adding value, again, the humanization component really dives in, and folks will focus elsewhere. And then the employee experience, really taking a holistic approach to that, having greater compassion for, again, not balance, but fit, and how people can actually work differently and still get their work done. And then total rewards, really focused on there can't be a one size fits all anymore. People have to be able to choose the compensation and benefits that will most support them. So how does a leader really coach to that and be able to predict and cater to that as necessary? And then the last couple here, employer brands during the crisis are being watched and defined. So the coaching and the ability to develop your talent is one of the things factoring into that new equation. Are you now a company whose brand has been, hey, when the chips were down, our leaders stepped it up and really made sure that our employees were okay? We developed skills, we had compassion, we really helped them not only through this, but we thrived because of it. We were a culture where we practice fail and learn. We were a culture that could ebb and flow. We were flexible and really gathered together to keep our customers and our employees engaged and satisfied. Digital transformation, I think we all know, is here to stay. Not only that, but it's still exponential in terms of its ability to transform the business and how things are working. So now it's not only, am I going to lose my job because of digital implementations of sorts? It's, we expect every employee to think about digital in their work and digitize themselves out of a job, because it's their higher level thinking that will then land them in the next job of which they can do the same thing. So it's helping people not be afraid of it, but embrace it. And that takes significant coaching and development. And I've already mentioned DEI is a priority. It's really how do leaders coach to inclusion? What kinds of skills, especially team dynamic skills, do they need to do that well and right? So I'm going to pause there. That was a lot of information, maybe some of it new to you, maybe not, but would love to just entertain any thoughts, questions, comments, curiosities that you have about this list. And then we're going to turn it to another dialogue, if you will. Any questions about this page?
I am really seeing this with the executives that I am coaching right now. They are feeling it already. Not only people leaving, but they had great talent that they've been interviewing, making decisions to go elsewhere because they aren't going to be flexible enough, or they don't have a solid development program. So I'm really interested, especially with the global group that's on this call. Are you guys seeing and starting to feel some of this?
I would love to chip in here. I was yesterday attending a evening conference, and Peggy, you know the group. It's the Association of Business Psychology in the UK. It was a meeting of 150 business psychologists, and what you are touching on today was exactly the topic last night. The future of work and the future of leadership and the future of companies. And to every one of your points, it's echoed on this side, at least on the European side. So maybe Robert and Gail can speak to South Africa, but in terms of the European side, it's completely echoed.
Just from the African side, I think that, we have a philosophy of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. So there's a huge focus on the humanization of the work environment. That performance is linked to the happiness of the people, and this retention of skills is based on a sense of not just performance but belonging, identification with the actual societal contribution of the company. And I think where we've got some advantage is in the governance, and one of the big indicators is rewards. The differential between the CEOs and the rest of the organization is something that gets monitored quite carefully. So the young generation come in and they're quite active, and they watch these factors very carefully. And they don't want to belong to an organization where the extrapolation of wealth is to a small elite. It has to trickle down to not just the shareholders, but to the stakeholders. So we've shifted from stakeholder to shareholder. So there's been big shifts on our space.
Judy, how about you?
Sorry, was that me?
Yes, please, Judy.
Yeah, I was just going to reflect that, Ursula, a lot of what you said certainly resonates in terms of what's happening in the UK. But what I am noticing is the difference in the extent to which that compelling why feels compelling in the public sector and in the private sector. So certainly the work that I've done within the NHS in England, there definitely seems to be a sense of catching up. The one that struck me was the disjoint between critical skills and critical roles or leadership roles. And I think that is really just starting to land with senior leadership certainly within the NHS. Also to some extent within education, so higher education, further education, it's starting to build up a bit of, get a bit of traction, I suppose, within the public sector. But up until now, it's been a real struggle to get that to land with quite a few senior leaders within the public sector.
Yeah, and Judy, just as a mention about higher education, what's interesting now is the many articles coming out that the colleges and universities are not preparing workers for this kind of workforce, where they have the level of creativity, innovation, problem solving, resiliency, kinds of traits that are going to prepare them for the volume of change that's expected as they even take their first job out of college. So yeah, really, really good thoughts. There's another person, Ian, how about you?
Kimberly. So I'm also from South Africa. Hello, Robert, and the other guys as well. Good to see you. A quick touch is one of the guys I'm coaching actually works in the banking sector, and he's been working from home. And one of the things that's really getting to him at this stage is how the bank monitors when he logs on, when he logs off, when he takes a tea break. And it's actually causing offense. It's saying, well, if you guys can't trust me, why should I work for you? So it's interesting the challenge this is posing to trust. I understand this is banking. Banking monitors everything. But now it's being translated as mistrust, which is, I think, going to translate in him looking for other work.
Sure. Yeah, I think as folks who especially weren't used to having a remote workforce in the past, that was, Marilyn, you can attest to this too. GE, when GE first started with either remote work or online tools that could actually connect people when they weren't in front of you, there was a running joke that if we saw your green light on, meaning your messaging panel, if your green light was on, that meant you were at your computer. Some of you might remember this. If your green light was off or it was red, it meant you weren't working. People were equating that. Well, that was, 15 years ago for the culture that I grew up in. For some folks, this is a brand new effort. How do I know that people are working when they're not right in front of me? And then what kinds of skills do you need to build in those leaders to get them there faster? Or to your great point, folks are going to leave. They're just going to find a different place that already has arrived in that mindset. Great point, Ian.
Kimberly, I want to add a point that I think that I just was amazed by. I'm reading another book on how to change this by Katie Melkman, and she's from the University of Penn. But what struck me is she was writing about Benjamin Franklin, and that Benjamin Franklin spent a lot of time in the UK. And he was kind of what would I say? He was, quite the pubster and quite the womanizer, okay? Along with other things that he was doing while he was in the UK. And when he was on a boat coming back to the US, they hit a lot of tides, and instead of taking 2 weeks, it took 2 months. While he was on that boat, he wrote the book of virtues. He wrote about his virtues, and then he started making a checklist of those virtues and then started monitoring himself, and that was part of the change piece. But what that told me is that we've all had at least a year, if not a year and a half, to reflect on what's most important to us. And I don't think organizations recognize what has gone on in that reflection for employees in terms of what's most important to them. And I think there was this belief that organizations were going to go back to the way they were, and they forgot that people were taking time to decide what really mattered in this extra space time. And I think that's what we need to work with from a coaching perspective, is how do we help bring those two groups back together in a humanizing work perspective.
Yeah, really good. Really good. Thanks, you guys, for the conversation. That was helpful. More to come, so keep that warm up going. Can you guys see my screen okay still?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Marilyn.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit. And I think the other thing that Kimberly and I wanted to do today is to help arm you all with tools and the arguments and the compelling whys, because, I don't think there's anyone on this call. As a matter of fact, I will say, I know there is not anyone on this call who doesn't believe this, who doesn't know about the importance of leaders doing coaching. So this was not about convincing those of you on the call, helping you to convince the leaders that you are working with, the organizations and the leaders, the executives. And so we have the new compelling why, as Kimberly has been talking about. And I know what I am seeing is there are still some old school leaders who don't believe it. It's a bunch of hooey, and our employees aren't going to leave, etc. So I wanted to at least share with you some research done pre-pandemic around the importance of coaching, because some of you may have those getting on board with the things are changing trends. Some of you may have leaders in organizations who are stuck in the past, and this may be that they need. But several studies referenced here that have shown how important coaching, and let me just qualify this a bit. In all of these articles and studies, it isn't just coaching, it's what they call optimized coaching, which means the leaders have been trained in how to coach. Because as we know, there's a broad definition if you talk to leaders about coaching. Leaders tell me all the time, oh yeah, I'm coaching. And I said, well, just tell me what that looks like, or what are you doing when you're coaching? Well, I'm just telling them, how they maybe should do this, or I'll go on a ride along with a salesperson, and then I'll tell them how they could have done it better. So we've got to define coaching and what coaching really is. And these studies are about when it has been defined, they've been trained, and it's been optimized. But a lot of information on employee retention, workplace psychology, their study in 2017, just strengthening productivity, creating that deeper bench, and again, improving employee retention. So when we are seeing 40% of the workforce thinking about leaving in the next 2 years, and I think, Kimberly, that number, I bet when the next study comes out, it's going to be in the next year. I think we're going to see that squeezed a little bit. We have to give some data so this is specifically for those of you working with sales leaders and people in sales organizations. CSO is Chief Sales Officer Insights. For sales organizations, global study, increase of win rates by 18%. Inc. did a similar study in the same time period. They came up with increased win rates by 17%. So I think the numbers are pretty accurate, reducing sales cycles and improving margins. The data is there that coaching will help an organization, not only on the human side and the retention side, but on the results side. And I know as all of us go out and try to sell the notion of coaching to organizations, they want to see some data.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, Kimberly. The other thing, and this is all recent data as well, so many times we link coaching and feedback, and other studies you can see from both Forbes, HubSpot, and a Gallup poll that came out very recently. The Gallup poll was done in the latter part of the pandemic, so end of last year. And this is just showing that, I love the last one. 1 in 5 employees are not confident their manager is going to provide regular constructive feedback. Well, I can tell you, if they don't think their managers are going to provide regular constructive feedback, those managers are not providing coaching either. So the employees are saying, we need it, we want it, we're not getting it.
Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about that too, Marilyn, just to link onto it, is I've been working with some clients who are really talking about the need. They see the gap, right? The need to give feedback, evolve their employee mindset, et cetera, et cetera. So they're saying, we just need a bigger learning department. We just need more internal coaches. We need to create an internal coaching department. And part of that could help, but instead I'm really having them lean into, you need to evolve your culture. A learning culture will be way more powerful than a learning organization. You'll never have the number of bodies you need to provide this. So can everyone provide feedback to everybody? Can everyone be a source of support and lifting others up in terms of performance? When it counts? Does the reliance need to be solely on management, especially knowing Marilyn's bullet number 3 is still alive and well in organizations, especially as we have a generational gap in terms of the way we do that and how often we do that. The expectation is just different across generations. I'm going to pause. Are there any questions or comments from the group?
I see Judy has something in the chat box, and Judy, this is what I hear as well. The leaders say, give me ROI numbers before we invest. And what I love is the ROI numbers are starting to come out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So
just
use
an observation, an additional observation, and in my experience, I love that distinction between the a coaching culture and the learning organization. I love that. But one of the things I quite often come up against is the sort of professional challenge, if you like. So the fact that managers need a whole different skill set. You know, you're asking something completely different of your population of managers, and that usually just feels like it gets put in the too difficult box.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can get agreement, but then it's just too much to try and do. So I come across that quite a lot, again, particularly in the public sector.
Absolutely. And part of that argument is going to be, unlike any other time, I think in our work history, who they are putting in that management space might need to be different. It can't
Yep.
just be the rock star sales rep who gets elevated into a sales manager role. It can't just be the great physician with tons of throughput who gets put into leaders of physicians and so forth. The skill set might be different. And there's some great study coming out of Salesforce.com, the Salesforce organization, Salesforce software. You guys, I'm sure, have heard of them. They created a platform on which they have equally banded individual contributors and leaders of people as being both are critical to our organization. Being a manager of people is not an elevated role. It's an equal role because not everybody is qualified nor wants to be a leader of people. So they've changed their compensation model, the way they think about the world of work, the way they think about who is actually more important and should have access to different sets of data or different information and so forth, because they value it that much. And I love the way that they've rethought that they want to get the right people in the right roles, but everybody has gifts. But that takes some effort, right? That takes some really great thought leadership to build that kind of culture within their organization. Really good point. So I'm sure everybody has a version of this. Again, to Marilyn's point, our goal was not to teach this as much as to remind you that these are some resources you can bring to your clients and your coachees. I love this one by the Blue Point Group. It's the one that I use the most when I'm trying to explain really the difference among all these different roles that our leaders play with their employees. Bottom line is, it's who owns the performance agenda. The more the leader owns the performance agenda, the more they're going to be directing, telling, coercing, explaining, et cetera, et cetera. As the performance agenda becomes the responsibility of the employee, and again, this is a cultural thing for many organizations. Who owns the employee development? Well, I'm waiting for the organization to tell me what classes to take, to tell me what my gaps are, to give me feedback, etc., as opposed to going out and seeking it and owning it for themselves. The more the employee can own their own performance agenda, the more the leader can perform as coach, as guide, as listener, as mirror, etc., etc. It's a sophisticated skill set, but it does have to be wrapped up into a culture that will provide that. Either the culture the leader built for their smaller team, if you will, or the department, the division, or eventually the enterprise. So helping organizations understand that this sophistication is possible, but it's got to be wrapped up in the right context is going to be pretty critical. Just to share that a little differently, many of you are familiar with situational leadership, I'm sure. In this regard, just as a refresher for those of you who've been away from the model for a bit, the whole model is built on, is that talent willing and or able to do that task? So this is at the task level. Depending on the yes or no interplay of that question, you will plot the talent somewhere on this bell-shaped curve. So in the lower right corner, they're typically unwilling, unable to perform a task. So you are definitely much more of a director. When they are up in the upper right quadrant, for example, they're very willing but unable. Think about like a new employee, for example. Well, then your skill set ebbs and flows a little bit, much more coach-like in that regard, but you still have your hand on what good looks like, and you're still directing the expectation level, but perhaps not all of the conversation. Upper left corner, as a reminder, this is where they are certainly capable of doing the task, but maybe unwilling. This is what we in the biz call shipwreck survivor syndrome, right? Oh, I've been through this before. You've asked me for that report before. I don't really think it's going to matter. So again, you have more of a coach-like persona in the upper left corner, but they clearly are able to do the job. They're just not necessarily willing or have the right attitude about it. Lower left corner, you guys, that's where the rock stars live for that task. Again, it's easy to generalize and say that the people live here, but it's actually the person with the task that will live in these quadrants. Here you are the most coach-like because they own ultimately their performance agenda. Your goal is to grow them, to help them see blind spots, to prepare them for greater levels of influence or work within the organization. So again, your coaching game, if you will, is firing on all cylinders at that point. When I work with talent with clients, sometimes this is a lot to take in as a crash course. As you can imagine, it's a 2 to 3 day course in and of itself. So here's my cheat sheet, quite frankly. This is the one that I use with folks that really helps resonate with them. When you are a leader who's working with talent and a specific task is needed, this kind of is the what do you do when? Who owns the performance agenda in this regard? So lower right quarter, it's when they're unable, unwilling. I speak as the leader and I decide what the next step is in terms of performance. So very not coach-like. So yes, management does still have a place in the organizational skill set, but it's not everywhere where we don't always use a hammer versus a nail. Upper right quadrant, it's we speak, but I still decide. So you're a newbie, you're new at this task. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to coach, ask some really great questions, but bottom line, I still own the expectation of what good looks like. So I'll help decide kind of the parameters of that performance. So some coaching, a little different. Here, coaching is definitely more toward attitudinal kinds of things. We'll speak and we'll decide together what the next steps are. And then lower left corner, the ultimate of sophisticated coaching skills is you, the talent, will speak, and you, the talent, will decide the next steps. I'm just there to buffer, bounce ideas off of, play a mirror, ask great questions, provoke, etc., etc. So the goal here is to ultimately let your talent own the performance agenda. So Sit Lead is, again, another tool that we have in our toolkit that can really be leveraged to help people understand that coaching has a very specific role. So do the other leadership tools in your toolkit, but it's time to vary the use of them now more than ever before. So here's where we'd like to open it up to the whole group to have another coach's mind share conversation of sorts. There are 4 things that we'd love to explore with you. The first 3 we're going to do as a whole group, and then we're going to break the group up into smaller groups and tackle the third and final and have a bit more of an intimate conversation. With regard to mindset and being able to shift that leader from the know-all, tell-all to being more open and curious and coach-like in their approach, let's just open it up to everybody. How have you been successful at getting a leader to transition?
Kimberly, I'll start it off while people are still thinking. I think the biggest resistance comes from fear. And I hear that all the time. When I tell people to do things, they know what to do. And when I'm coaching them about their performance, it takes longer and I don't have the time to do it. And so I'm afraid they won't follow through. And so all these fears come up as far as what really gets in the way. And so it's more of a kind of a Mikey, try it kind of thing. Well, what 2 or 3 things could you try? I'm not going to go full on coaching, but how could you shift a little bit to move that fear? What might you try that would move, quickly? And so it really teaching them how to question, giving them some ideas on questions to get the thinking going. Because if you remember, our perspective at Global IOC is coaches are thinking partners. So how do we encourage that thinking to get their employees to respond to them? So that's one of the ways that I think we shift the mindset, is by wanting the best from their employee and getting to it from a thinking partnership.
Great. Thank you, Peggy. Who else?
Similar perspective from me. I think what I've done quite a lot of is encouraging those in, people in leadership positions, particularly the directors of this world, to really explore their own relationship with their own learning. And I think once it lands for someone that actually, if you stop learning, then you stop being effective, particularly in a leadership role. And part of that learning is being willing to say, actually, I don't have the answers. I'm not here to tell you everything. I think once that kind of somehow gets integrated in the way they think of themselves, it gets easier to shift from that telling directive position to asking and being a bit more inclusive and distributed leadership, I suppose.
Yeah, I so agree. And to combine the great thoughts, Judy, that you and Peggy both had, I think a lot of this comes down to ego. Can you help their sense of self really separate from the value I add is in imparting my knowledge upon others versus helping others come up with their own knowledge set, right? Based on their own experience, their own trials and errors, and so forth and so on. So this concept of fear that Peggy talked about really is the ego saying, who am I if I'm not the expert? And it's hard to get people to let go of that, especially if they're still in the I got to prove myself mode. Yeah, really good point.
And Kimberly, this is where it goes back to that opening quote from Jack Welch for me. When I think my job as a leader is to know all, I will have a hard time jumping off into being a coach. But when I realize my job is to grow others, it's a lot easier. So this starts so based with what is your role as a leader, and help. And again, it's overcoming the fear that Peggy talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Peggy introduced many of us to the book Scaling Leadership by, I think it's Adams and Anderson. Peggy, is that right? I have given that book to more of my clients than I ever thought, because that's what they need to learn. There's data behind it, right? This is no longer just general speak. There's data behind the ability to actually scale and grow folks through your coaching and great leadership.
So Kimberly and Marilyn, I have a question for you. So underneath the fear is this need to be certain. Okay. And yeah, that's ego driven, but it's also our culture. We know what we know. And so that when you say the know all tell all, moving, what I've noticed in our presentations, we've moved from there's more questions than answers. We have ideas, but we don't know what we don't know. And being able to say, and you're right, that's ego, but there's this certainty that when you move into a leadership role, you know it, and you can't say you don't know it. And so that's, to me, the biggest challenge, is that I'm very certain. And not only am I certain, I'm very certain because the research or whatever, the facts support me. And being able to let go of that to go with the flow is so challenging.
Yeah, I agree, Peggy. I have one client, well, actually maybe more than one, as I'm reflecting on this, where if you show up not knowing something, you are raked over the coals in an operating review. Isn't that true, Dave? In an operating review, in a sales call, and so that is a sign of failure in many ways. And so of course that carries into their coaching, because they're having an identity crisis. Well, you told me I got to know everything here, but now you're telling me I'm not supposed to know anything that I'm supposed to let everybody else know. So I'm trying to work with them to say, what if you aren't always the one doing the operating review, the pitch? What if you bring in some of your peeps? And if you don't know the answer to a question, they jump in, and you're proving to folks that you're sharing the knowledge, you're growing skills. So it's back to that cultural thing. How can you help them be more coach-like in everything they do, as opposed to just individual conversations? Because you can't reward one thing and expect another.
I'd like to maybe just add a point. After a lot of failure on this issue, the penny dropped for me when I realized there needs to be a shift from the client focusing on the role as part of their self-actualization, to rather they are there as custodians of the role. So the shift must be to the role and to what it requires. What's the script? What is the particular specificities of the role that's required for that moment? And they appear as custodians. And that was a big shift.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You
really
know, there's Simon Sinek has a great minute and I think 45-second video clip on that exact same point. And so if I can find it, I'll try to put the link in the chat box, but it is one that I show to new managers all the time. And it talks about that same point.
Kimberly, first and foremost, phenomenal information so far. The one thing that I kind of wanted to bring in is you have to look at the corporate culture. You have to understand if we're dealing with large corporations of what the pressure is that they are under. I also think that we need to understand if they're a boss or a leader. The fiduciary responsibility for a lot of these individuals, I think it's an open opportunity for the coaches listening to this to get into those corporations, but to go from that boss to leader type of mindset, looking at how are we going to get better, understanding the corporate culture, because some of the older corporate cultures, they want that person that's going to point the finger in today's society and under today's rule. You know, we want to look at that boss that's moving over to the leadership role, but they also don't want to say something to someone that is going to offend them and to disrupt that path that they're on. So, you know, we as coaches have to understand that. It's awesome too to be in that situation, because we can be hired as that third party so that they're not under that responsibility of risk under their corporate rolling and the way things have been done in past. So we have to understand that. I think what Peggy had said, what some of the other coaches had already said is very true. The trust, the education side of it, the fear, and that's an open opportunity for us. But it's also a way to make them understand that difference between the boss world and the leader world. And I've seen that. I work with that. So just a little bit of my standpoint from that too.
Really good point. Really good point, Dave. Yeah,
Kimberly, I know that we're really running out of time here. I just wanted to point out, Peggy, I think, is going to be posting these slides. And what we have at the end of the slide deck are some of the tools that I have been using with some of the leaders that I'm trying to teach them to adopt this coaching mindset. Examples they can ask, you know, the process of making sure, looking at what's the root cause, really assessing that, helping people learn on the job. So again, I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I just want you all to know, and I'm sure I'm breaking up because I'm getting a message that says I am breaking up again. But there are a lot of different questions that may help you, not questions for you to ask, but questions for you to give your leaders to ask in their conversations and in shifting that mindset.
So this is our last, as I said, our last webinar before September. Stay tuned for when we schedule our September. We'll be doing them monthly. Don't forget to go out to the blogs. There's a blog that connects with Leader as Coach, Coach as Leader, that you can make connections to what Kimberly and Marilyn were sharing. Go to our book reviews, go to our past webinars. They're being edited right now, and as they're edited, they're posted. We will have more events like this. So just this summer, we've got DISC values training starting on July 15th. It's for 3 weeks. It's 2 hours. It starts at 4 o'clock Eastern. You'll be receiving more information because you're on the mailing list. Those of you in South Africa have different dates and times. We have the associate class starting on September 9th. We have the advanced class starting on September 7th, and we have the master class starting on the 8th. So if you have any interest in those classes, make sure you go out to the website and register and join us. We're super excited about all the work that's been done over the last 3 years. I'm so excited and thrilled with the faculty we have. And I just want to tell you, thank you so much for joining us today and for being part of the group that contributed to the body of knowledge, but especially to Marilyn and Kimberly, who taking the time to put the presentation together. And this was amazing information. And we're probably going to make you come back in the fall. So just so you know that, okay?
Yeah.
Have a
Thank you,
great
everybody.
summer,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you for attending. And I look forward to hearing you and seeing you in the fall. Bye-bye.